Julia Mossbridge advocates for a pretty wild idea, which is that it is possible for people to look forward in time. And in her research laboratory, that is exactly what she has shown. And we go into the details of how exactly that works later on in the podcast, around let's say, hour and 20 or so. But the larger conversation that we have with her is about the very nature of science. What does it mean to try to explain something? What does it mean to try to explain something as complex as the human brain? Is psychology a science as much as physics is? And why is it that we don't treat it as having the same sort of privilege in our society? It is a meta conversation about what it means to do science, about what it means to value ideas, what it means to explain something. And in there, at the very end, is a pretty deep dive into the world of precognitive experiments, what it means to be able to see past the present moment, and a little bit about love, but we don't finish that conversation. That's for next time.
If you enjoy the conversation, please share it with somebody. Get down in the comments and tell us what you think about it. Give us your ideas, especially on who we could talk to follow up with some of these topics. And if you really love it, consider becoming a patron and getting on board with the Inside Crew so you can help us make bigger decisions about this podcast and where we go with it next.
Enjoy the conversation with Julia Mossbridge, and we will see you next week.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The Demystified Side Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
The recent James Webb data, which was in the news right when they started taking photos, where they were like, hey, there's fully formed galaxies on the very edge of the universe. And that means that galaxies must have formed in the first, 200 to 500 million years after the Big Bang?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of crazy.
Well, it's just not, it's surprising because we had the idea that structure gets created over time, but that's the assumption that ends up getting destroyed.
Well, there's also a weird assumption about a beginning, right? Or a beginning that is relatively recent. And so one of the projects that we're doing at Demystify Sci is we're trying to shift the understanding of cosmology, because cosmology is myth-making more than any other branch of science. It's the way that we tell our story about our position in the universe and what it means to have a universe. And like we look at our own lives where there is a birth and there is a death, we have a tendency to look at cosmology in the same framework of birth and
Wait
death.
a minute. I don't think you have to, hold on. I don't think you have to say that cosmology is more than any other science is about myth-making. Psychology is about myth-making, biology is about myth-making, physics is about myth-making, sociology is about myth-making, chemistry is about myth-making. It's all about myth-making and storytelling. That's how human beings function. So I don't think we have to claim that cosmology more than any other science is about that. I just think cosmology, like every science, is about that. But that particular myth might be more interesting to you.
Well, what I think I mean by that is that it is the myth of origin. Like biology has an origin myth, which is the origin of life, but physics has a myth, which is the origin of everything. And so it feels in some ways like the foundational myth.
Let's talk about this.
Yes, let's do it.
The timetables of it also constrain other disciplines like astronomy as well. Like all of the narratives that we pin to what these bodies that we see out in space, when we talk about their formation, we're always trying to squeeze them in under this time limit that's specified by our cosmology, which is really fascinating because it gets a little silly sometimes. Like we compress all of the events of formation into a few 100 million years for most of these bodies, which is very difficult to imagine. When you talk about, say, like the floor of the oceans is only 200 million years old, it's like, wait, how did a whole planet get made that quickly? That's kind of strange.
But see, these are going back to this idea that creating structure and complexity takes time, and that's an assumption that continues to be misproven. But it's a myth, and it's interesting. It's an interesting myth. But so let's talk about that. But also, like back to this idea that physics or that cosmology, that the myth is about the origin of everything. That's interesting because I don't think so. I think it's about the origin of the universe. Is the universe everything? So here's the big question, cosmologists like to think they're looking at everything. Are they looking at mental concepts? Are they looking at creativity, emotional states? These are things that are non-physical, but most people would include in everything. And so to me, that's sort of a left out area that is kind of huge, like consciousness, right?
And that's the question, right? So I think that you have to define things appropriately, or you have to define things within the realm of the conversation that you're having. And when I say universe, I mean everything that exists.
Yeah, but everything that exists includes a creative idea or a feeling. Are those things physical? Do those things either not exist, or if they exist, are they physical? I'm asking because I don't think cosmology is studying them.
I think that in physics, when we say exist, we just mean material actors that have surfaces and so forth, and they have a location, right? You can have imaginary materials as well, but they don't have a true location with respect to the other objects. But then there's all these concepts which don't exist; they just occur. Like a relationship is an occurrence, whereas a physical material exists. This is the dichotomy in physics.
In physics, right? That's how you define everything in physics, as everything physical. And what I'm saying is most people would say that a feeling or an idea certainly exist and belong to the world of everything, but they're not physical. So we have a non-dual understanding, sort of a folk understanding of the world that is non-dual, that needs to be addressed and is sorely under-addressed, especially by physicists, because it's this idea that if we explain the physical world, we have now explained everything, and all the things that exist follow the rules of the physical realm. But some of the things that exist are not physical, like they don't have a location, so they don't have to follow those rules. But we're not going to talk about that because we're talking about everything in the. So it's a circular argument that grows up around physicists who are using their minds and making lots of concepts which aren't physical to try to understand things that are physical, making some progress, but not acknowledging that they're using the non-physical tools of consciousness to get there.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. We were just talking about something really similar with Carl Friston yesterday, because we were working our way around why the robotic systems that we have ahead of us in the future, like the artificial intelligence interfaces, they seem so unkind and uncaring. And it comes down to the fact that programming love is not a simple idea. It's not just a motion of some gear that you can tap in and dial coordinates for.
Right.
And I think what you're saying is really bringing that into light, that some of these wider concepts, because they can't be placed in a location, we have difficulty manipulating them.
Yes, well, and I think this comes to the difficulty with trying to understand time in physics, because you said very precisely what I think is also the case, is that anything that's physical has a location, although sort of like photons and things, you sort of go, well, like maybe that's not really physical because of that. But in any case, on average, like
that's one of our favorite topics. Yeah, we've done a few episodes recently about photons, but yeah, they seem to be an activity more than an object.
They seem to be a description of something that's sort of in between the physical and the mental, as far as I can understand. But they're not. Yeah, they're not in the physical like the other physical things. But there is this world of things that have a location, and there's a world of things that have a position in time. And I'm not convinced they're the same world. Like sometimes I think that the reason time is so hard to understand in physics is because it's a trait of a mental process rather than a physical process. So
yeah, it certainly requires memory. It certainly requires memory. That's what's really interesting about time, is that without some knowledge of what happened before, you don't have a record, and therefore you don't have time. And physicists get around it because they're just like, time is what clocks do. But this is a really poor definition too, because clocks behave differently depending on how they're geared up.
What they're leaving out of that is that a clock is actually a device. It's a metaphor for us to have our own experience. So what they're leaving out of the clock thing is the clocks don't do anything. Clocks just go tick, 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 tick. It means nothing. But we provide the meaning, and the meaning part is what they don't want to talk about, because there's no established definition of meaning in physics.
Oh, and so the question then becomes, do you have to have a framework of meaning for doing physics? Or is it possible to do... And I think that the consensus...
You can't get away from it, right?
I mean, in practice, you can't get away from it, right? Because you have to understand that when you look at something, you're looking at it through your own lens, and you're looking at it through the lens of a human experience, and a human experience at this corner of the solar system at this time, in the galaxy, in the universe, the collection of all things that are. But it's like, we have a tendency in the sciences to come to a place where we're like, that stuff is outside of what we think about and what is important. And we don't necessarily have to interrogate that in order to be able to tell the story. And we don't have to talk about the fact that we're telling a story in order to be able to tell the story. And that's kind of the weird...
Hold up. When you say in the sciences, this is, again, there's blankets of bias here. So anthropology is a science. Psychology is a science, sociology is a science, and in these sciences, we actually say we absolutely have to ask those questions and attend to those things. So I often hear people in the world of physics and in chemistry, not biology, because they sort of they understand like the living things have this complexity, but with biology, physics and chemistry and mathematics say, well, the sciences, what they mean is the hard sciences, which are of course the easy sciences. But in any case, the ones where you don't have to take that stuff into account, or at least you believe that you don't have to take that stuff into account. So there's several layers of biases here that go on and really hurt the field, all the fields of science. They hurt the entire field.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that everybody does seem to defer to the physicists at the end of the day. Like they do have this position in the pantheon that's privileged, and I assume that's because they can quantitatively reason in such a way that appears as hieroglyphics to other people, and there's no real check and balance there. But
that's not why.
Oh yeah, tell me why, please.
Well, we know that the more women that are in the field, the lower its status. So you could take we all know the hierarchy of the sciences, physics and mathematics at the top, underneath that chemistry, underneath that biology, computer science is up at the top. Again, I forgot about that one. Underneath that psychology, underneath that sociology, underneath that anthropology. It's directly correlated with the number of women who stay in the field. So it's not about, you could tell a story about, oh, there's no checks and balances. Why are there no checks and balances? Why are there no checks and balances? Why do we allow them to claim the privileged position?
Well, so this is, I think, due to the fact that the privileged position is one that can speak with certainty. And it is a position that says, this is where I plant the flag, and this is fact, and beyond that, there is little interpretation that is possible. And so when I say that cosmology is a fundamental myth-making, what I mean is the fact that you have people that plant a flag, and they're like, these are the constraints for everything that happens afterwards, and I will brook no argument.
But that's true for every field. I speak with certainty in my field. There's no, we just accept it more. When a physicist says, well, did you know that the particle could be in two places at once? You go, wow, that's cool. When a psychologist says, did you know that your unconscious mind is controlling everything that you're saying right now? People go, yeah, that's bullshit. It's not about this certainty thing. It's about the underlying belief that we have that by simplifying, it's a reductionist belief, that by simplifying everything, reducing everything to a symbol, and then manipulating those symbols, the universe is simple enough that that's going to give us insight. And that has been true in some cases, and I would argue not true in many cases. If you talk to the world of physics and cosmology now, do you have a sense that there's some kind of democratic agreement on what the reality is? No, you do not.
I would say so.
I mean, most of the cosmologists adhere to the birth of the universe idea at this point.
That's one idea they adhere to, but there are many ideas that they're arguing over, right? That's the same like biologists. They largely adhere to evolution and then argue about other things. I think we fool ourselves into thinking it deserves a privileged position. I think that's incorrect.
Well, I think that you're right about that. So to agree with you, it would be to say that we fool ourselves into believing that physics, as the study of object relationships, has a privileged position. And I think that you're absolutely right that there are things about the internal world that get less of a privileged position. And I think that that has a lot to do with the fact that it's unobservable in many ways. Like, I imagine that as we move towards a world where neuroscience and psychology has more to do with brain scans and being able to put some kind of chip into your brain where you can project what you're thinking onto a screen and a bunch of people in a room can look at it and say, this is what's happening.
And mathematizing it,
And
right?
mathematizing
like we were seeing
it.
with Friston and with Don Hoffman.
Yeah, as you mathematize it and as you give it these modular parameters, it will begin to acquire a different status in the world. And I think
what you're saying is that the physical and what we call the objective has higher status in terms of truth value than the mental or what we call subjective. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
But the question is, why is that the case?
Well, because the idea of truth is objective inherently.
No.
I mean, I think
So
in the popular conception, when people say this is truth, they don't mean that this is something that you can come at from different places and get a different result. They mean that no matter what path you take to it, you will arrive at the fact that this is so. And everybody wants that. People really, really, really crave that. And to put them in a position where you're like, well, hey, maybe there isn't that, and maybe you really have to consider that when you're looking out onto the world, that's a place that people, I think in general, shy away from because it's very uncomfortable.
Yes.
And so
it's very uncomfortable. And good. And so that's the pushing of the boundary, right? So yes, so people want to have truth. Science's job is not to give them truth. Our job is to consistently be wrong and consistently be improving our models. That is our work, right? So our job is not to say like, hey, we're really certain that this vaccine or whatever it is awesome and will not hurt anybody. That's not the job of science. It's just never been the job of science. That's the job of PR people, right? I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but what I'm trying to walk us back from, and I'm very, as you can tell, I'm passionate about this, is because what I feel like you don't recognize, or I don't even know if you recognize it, or if you're playing a character who doesn't recognize this for the benefit of the audience, but what it feels like is what you're not recognizing is that the only tool that we have to perceive this truth is the very tool that we discount. Okay, how are you going to perceive the truth? Okay, so let's say you do the thing, which by the way has already been done, where you put the chip in the brain and people could see what someone is thinking, right? So now is it more true that they're thinking that? No, because they could tell you like, hey, guess what? This is what I'm thinking. It's that we don't trust our own inner experience. It's that we don't acknowledge it. We see through it like a window and don't acknowledge the window, but it covers everything we see. Right? You could talk to Donald Hoffman, you talk to me, you talk to anyone who studies perception. Right? The first thing you learn is that this window that you're looking to into the world, it matters. And the information that you think is objective that you get back from the world is because everyone's looking through a window, and these windows are programmed similarly, but they have no ability to tell you what's true. They tell you what's agreed upon in your perceptual experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's exactly what I'm saying, which is that there is a fracture in the way that science is perceived versus what it ought to be for people.
Yeah, I think the main thing that we are drumming on and on about in this show, and really even when we're teaching or anything, is that science has to be viewed as this discipline of possibility. And the confusion of science with technology, in my estimation, explains a lot of this fracture, because technology needs to be reliable. You need to have answers. And when you do parameterize something quantitatively, you're able to make certain extensions of that. In fact, it's gotten so bad that a theory in physics no longer means an explanation for a phenomenon. It just means a predictable quantitative pattern. So, we can describe Einstein's like the most famous scientist of all time. I mean, he did a lot of science, but he also did a lot of math. And Einstein gave us a predictable pattern, but a completely nonsensical explanation for what's happening. And so this is pushed people more and more towards this quantitative side of things that becomes very difficult, because how do you compare one person's perception to another without setting up some sort of trick that'll allow you to collapse the situation down to one question, or down to, which might affect.
But see, it's the wrong question. So that's I get that. I get your program, and I think it's really important, and I'm not arguing with your program. What I'm trying to do is be clear about the biases that underlie the thinking on this. I mean, these are big biases. This is like my fight with all of science, right? I mean, this is a big deal. This is a philosophical query. And it's about the idea that if we could just explain things simply, we have therefore explained things that are complex. So that's reductionism. So it's about physicalism, the idea that everything that exists is physical. So if we've explained the physical, we've explained everything. It's these, and then there's the misogynistic piece of anything that women are doing isn't valuable, and how that colors the whole thing. So these pieces end up really flavoring things without us noticing. And I'm just calling out, like, can we just notice how they flavor things? And the way in which they feed into the status of like, oh, well, we parameterize this, so we got technology. It's ignoring that you can parameterize human experience extremely well, and it has been done. So like psychophysics is the discipline of treating the brain or mind like a black box, and having inputs and outputs, and being able to predict what would be going on in that box without actually knowing. And it's based on people's actual physical, well, I'm not going to say physical in this context, actual mental experiences of whatever a stimulus is. It's extremely good. It's the equivalent of quantum theory in terms of going out to 16 decimal places. I mean, it's a very good theory about how people actually experience things. But we don't talk about that as a real parameterization that could be used in technology, even though it is all the time. Like, so the iPhone, yes, you have to have general relativity to create GPS that works, but you also have to understand the human mind to create Google Maps and Waze, so that you can actually do that in a way that's actually going to function for people. So we don't talk about that as much, but that's an incredibly useful science that has been parameterized by a whole slew of people who create technology to help humans, but it's not considered the same. And so it's not considered as valuable. And I just really want to let that sink in. Like, you have to learn how to, the Wright brothers had to learn how to make an airplane. But in order to make air travel as popular and powerful as it is, you have a bunch of marketing people who had to understand human beings.
Yeah, I was going to say, who's the guy? Mark Zuckerberg probably values this qualitative science a lot more.
It's not it doesn't. Again, it's called qualitative. It's quantitative. You can parameterize and quantitate these things. Like, literally, you can make this quantitative. That's what psychophysics is. So again, it's this. There's all these studies about gender bias and what's considered a soft science and what's a hard science. People don't talk about them. It highly affects how we think of what is valuable in science and what we think of as objective, when in fact, everything that is what we call objective, that is agreed upon by two or more people, comes through these filters that we share, you see.
Can you talk more about psychophysics? I don't really know the discipline at all.
Yeah, sure. So let's see, I think Dave Green would be a good person. Green and Sweat is the great psychophysics textbook for acoustics, which is the discipline I was raised up in. But there's also visual psychophysics. The question of psychophysics is what can we predict about what people will be experiencing given certain inputs, and what do those input-output relationships tell us about what's going on in the mind? So it's like a phenomenological approach, but quantitative. So phenomenological means an approach that allows you to ask the question, what's going on in your phenomenal experience? What's going on in your experience of this situation, right? So psychophysics says, instead of just saying like, hey, I feel like groovy today, or whatever, it's actually, we're going to make this quantitative. So we're going to ask you with this input, how groovy?
Yeah. I was gonna say.
With this input, how groovy do you feel? And you have a slider, right? And you're changing the slider. And over time, you have a curve of like your grooviness, whatever that means to you, right? Relative to this input. And then we could do that with a bunch of people, and we can predict very nicely the level of grooviness that you're going to get with, a wall that's blue versus a wall that's orange, on average between people, right? So, and then you can look at differences in that prediction based on gender, color, or time of waking up in the morning. And you could do all these really powerful predictions, which are used to make technology. They're quantitative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that the trick is, do you think, all right, so I guess what I was getting out of this technology is I don't think the ability to make technology is science. I think that's,
neither.
Yeah, so science requires you to explain the cause of the phenomena. And that's where it gets really strange, because on one hand, there's a group of folks who are looking at the cause in terms of electrical signals and network dynamics. And then there's this psychological aspect, which is it's almost like psychology tried to take up the banner of what was left behind with the death of religion and, the just falling out of favor of literature. I mean, how many people sit around reading and writing literature today? Poetry, mythology. It's almost like psychology has tried to scientize these ideas, these discussions of meaning. How successful can science be at addressing those questions?
Pretty successful, if it's given the chance to not have to be physics. So behavioral economics, for instance, is a field in which every science that's below the threshold of physics is trying to get to the status of physics, because that's our current. It doesn't mean that it's inherently the best field. It just means that's our current bias, right? And so, sure, you see psychologists who get very upset about issues in psychology because it makes them feel less like physicists and more like religionists or something, right? And so you see biologists with the same concern. And so whenever there's a status pyramid, the people are always trying to raise the status of their field and move in whatever direction raises the status. So if that's reductionism, then they will go in a reductionist direction. If that's a physicalist direction, they will go in that direction, right? But psychologists, through behaviorism, which was an absolute attempt to try to be more like physics. So basically, let's assume the person has no content. And psychophysics came along and said, great, person's a black box, right? It's like we're going to treat people and organisms like a control system. So we really can predict them just like a machine. We're going to treat them like a machine. There's no internal contents. What the fascinating thing to me is just to me, it's like this is such an obvious point, but is still ignored by most people, even in psychology, and this is the thing that they study, is that there's someone who's doing that. And that person has a perception, and that perception is driving everything that they do. And that person might be a physicist, but they also might be a psychologist, right? They might be a biologist. And there's no instance of a person who's fully perceiving truth without it going through their filter of perception. So this is back to Plato's cave. Like, we literally don't have a discipline that allows us to turn around and go, wait, there's people making those shapes on the wall. We don't have that discipline except for in the contemplative disciplines of meditation. That's the only discipline that I know of that allows you to do that. And of course, the trick with that is it's a great answer, but with no capacity to check it. So it's back to your experience and having the skill of being able to look at what's true, but there's no way to check that externally. So it's the opposite problem of physics, where there's an external way to check it, but no awareness of your inner capacity to turn 180 and look at the witness, the person who's, or not the person, look at the witness. And so what's fascinating to me is physics and the contemplative traditions are always kind of in this interesting, like, little swimming, almost complementary, like in the physics sense, almost complementary relationship, right? But what also fascinates me is that we don't ask physicists to take perception classes, when in fact all they would have to take is like perception 101, and they'd be like, wow, it really turns out what I think is true about the physical world is just my perceptual system. So, anyway, I think that's all in there somewhere. Sorry. Am I being too assertive?
No. There's so many things that I agree with, and there's also so many things that I feel like are just inherent to the way that I'm going to say something that I'm almost certain that you're going to disagree with, but inherent to the way that people like to see the world. And what I mean by that is this, which is that physicists are in the business of saying that we see accurately, our devices measure accurately, we have designed an experiment to see clearly, this experiment is objective, and there is no question that this is how it works. And because they are in the business of making the myths that everybody else pulls on, and they're in the business of creating the story that everybody else kind of hews to, like you were saying, like it follows that story, they're in a position in a world where God has died, that they create God. And I think that that's what a lot of the interpretations of quantum physics are, which is they're the interpretations that allow for something magical in the universe, because then you're in a position where you are explaining the magic of the universe.
Yeah,
and
they get to be gods.
Say one more time?
They get to be gods. Absolutely.
Exactly. And so that's a thing that I don't think that you're going to erase people's desire to be gods. Like, I think that physicists, you put them in a perception class, they would be like, I don't buy that for a second. I am different. I am free from bias. Like, even if you look at our models,
they're free from bias, yeah.
Right? Like, even if you look at the way that we describe the models of bias in the human brain, there is a certain way of being that is unbiased, and everything else is a deviation from normal. Right. And so you can put that person into however many...
We've put it in front of lots of people. The person who came up with the Big Bang was a priest, for starters. I mean, and it just kind of goes downhill from there. But you can't put that in front of someone. It's just like...
Yeah, like we've had conversations with physicists that are, emeritus professors. They have been leaders in their fields for a really long time. And we're like, look, one of the main pillars for the origin of the universe and for the story that you're telling, for there to be an age of creation, is this Doppler shift of light. And so the things that are farther away have a longer wavelength, and so they appear redder. Is it possible that there's a different interpretation of this red light shift than the one that everyone agrees on? And they're like, no. And you're like, why not? And they're like, there just isn't. And no one's studying that, and that's not a question.
Well, it becomes a religion. Yeah, because human beings, so yes, let's talk about that. So demystifying science, people. Because human beings, ask a psychologist, we're gonna create gods. If we don't have it in a god that's like a white man with a beard, we're gonna make it into a physicist who's likely a white man with a beard. And it's like, this is what we do. And the gods we resemble the people who have the gods resemble the people who have the status in the society, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So that's all just human psychology. It's going to happen. What I would prefer is not that it doesn't happen, because I think it happens for a reason, and I think it's a really valuable reason. I think that there actually is some kind of force, or I'm going to call it a force, a natural force that moves through us, that connects us, that is fundamental to the universe. And that is, I like to call it love. Like, I'll call it love. But that's a natural force, like we could study it, right? We should. But that's kind of what we're pointing to with all this. But it's pretty hard to have a relationship with a force. Right? Except for physicists, but I'm sympathetic with physicists because I do some physics experiments, but it's pretty hard to have a relationship with a force. So we turn it into, well, what do we know how to have relationships with? We know how to feel humbled by and awed by something. We're drawn to feel humbled and in awe of something. So there's never a situation where it really works to say, you know what, we're just not going to have anything we feel humbled or in awe of, that we feel is mysterious, that we feel that is more powerful than we are. If we say that, we're just going to fail and we'll find something else. It'll be money. It'll be whatever, fame, right?
Do you think that if we're able to parameterize love the same way that we can parameterize the behavior of light or something, that there might be technologies that could spring from that? Because I think the technologies are what win people over. They're why people hand over the authority to the physicists, because the physicists can build things that are cool.
They can make an atom bomb, you know? It's like you can build
or a
something.
Computer.
Yeah. You build something that is incontrovertible, that you cannot argue with, and then everybody's just like, I guess they are gods.
Okay, a couple things. Let's back up a little bit on the sort of aren't physicists amazing thing, and we'll answer this question about technology and love in a second, because I think the answer is yes, and I'd love to talk about that. But you two hang out with a lot of physicists. You're sort of bathed in the cult of academic science, where all this seems totally apparent to you, but in the actual world outside of that, there's not like a huge reverence for, I hate to tell you, there's like a really huge reverence for like Tiffany, what's her name? She has this amazing new album out. Anyway.
Oh, Taylor Swift. Yeah.
Taylor Swift, the first artist in history to have all 10 slots on the Billboard 100.
I know, it's amazing. And those songs are really good. And anyway, she has this song about, sometimes I think I'm just a monster on the hill, sort of lurching towards the people below. And then she's like, did you catch my, what is it, cloaked narcissism, or my veiled narcissism? So it's this thing of like, why are physicists so revered? Coming from people who are really immersed in the world of physics sort of feels like a little bit of veiled narcissism and not totally accurate. I
mean, it's hard to find a demigod like Einstein, right? Like, I don't know, there's something about the way that physics treats its heroes that I don't see in other disciplines.
Like, we have to border this and be like, we are bordering this at science, because I don't think that Albert Einstein is as revered as Taylor Swift is. Like, I don't think that there's a lot of teenage girls that are like, oh my God, Albert Einstein. But they are like, they're screaming for Taylor Swift and Harry Styles or whatever. And so there is a boundary to everything that we're saying, which is that we are examining science as a discipline. And in science, it does seem like what everybody does is they point to physics. You ask any foundational question in the sciences, and you ask enough people, and at the end of the line will be somebody who's like quantum physics, cosmology.
I mean, there's not even a Nobel Prize for biology. So
in terms of like reverence, yeah.
So that may be true in chemistry and biology, but in psychology, I don't know anyone who points to Albert Einstein. It's all like Kahneman, Tversky, William James, Freud, Jung. It's so, and you say, well, in science, but this is, again, I'm pointing out that you don't mentally count those things as science.
But I would go so far as to say that even if they point to Freud and Jung, and then you get to consciousness, when you get to consciousness, so many people point to quantum, right?
Well, now they do.
Well,
they do.
Sure. And so maybe not through history. And I think that you're right that historically the discipline has been separate and hasn't been ensconced in this physics worship. But the prevalence of quantum physics and the spookiness of it and the ability to say, well, like, there's just weird stuff that we don't get, and that must be where all of the things that we don't understand, that must be where they come from. And that's a thing that's happened in the last 30 or 40 years, I think. I don't think that it was there before, but what we are talking about, at least what I'm bounding myself to, is like the condition that we're in right now, and I don't think that it is the right condition. I agree that it is not, that physics is not the supreme science, but I do think that in order to figure out what to do, like, I spend a lot of time thinking about this because, for example, there was a press release for the BICEP telescope, which was done on YouTube. And when they did the press release, they put it out on YouTube, and I think there was a live press conference, and 1 million people watched this press conference for the release of the results that proved the inflationary era of the Big Bang. Show me another scientific press conference that has 1 million people watching it.
Oh, the one about is there life on Mars? So that's a extraterrestrial biology. I mean, I just think that you gotta. I agree that physics is on top of the academic science pyramid. There's no question.
I think that
right?
UFOs and alien life and like UAPs and stuff definitely sit up there though. I have noticed that. Like I think that in the popular view, consciousness,
It's the places of mystery.
yeah, and like big mystery, not like, because nobody cares about microbiology. Like I'm a microbiologist and this is something that I deal with. I was talking to a friend of mine and I was like, man, it's so weird because people go gaga for like stars and stuff, but you start talking to them about bacterial biofilms and they're just kind of like, ugh.
But it's not just mystery. It's men. I'm sorry, it's men because there's so much mystery in psychology, right? So, for instance, I study precognition, which is about predicting future events, and for 15 years, I've been showing data that people can predict future events that shouldn't be predictable. It's totally mysterious. Do you think it has the status of physics? When a physicist talks about 11 dimensions, and people are like, "Wow, 11 dimensions, that's cool." That's not the response I get.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and I think that we should dig into that because it's like, okay, so there is a long history of basically skepticism towards stuff like precognition, about hypnotism, about all of these mental states.
Yes,
and
because there's skepticism towards that the mental states actually exist.
which seems, especially with something like hypnotism, seems obviously insane to say that the state doesn't exist because
Absolutely.
I think that what it is that people don't want to see themselves in that state. Like nobody wants
people don't want to be out of control.
People don't want to ever identify themselves as being someone who is hypnotizable. And so you're fighting against the story that they tell themselves about themselves, which is the fact that I'm an exception. And if you look into mentalism, you do find that, for example, what is it, Darren Brown? Darren Brown does all of these shows about, these big mentalisms. And if you look into his process, he selects deeply, right? He has to go through the process of finding the people who are the most suggestible.
He sifts through thousands of people sometimes.
And so that's I think that's what gives people the license
but
to
even then people watch it sometimes, like, right, we play it for your dad or something, he's like, no, this guy's a stooge, he's a plant. We're like, no, like people really will do that.
Yeah, because he has this. If you've seen,
I've seen a really good mentalist before do their thing. Yeah, Lloyd Auerbach is a really good mentalist, and it's all about knowing people. It's all about intuition. It's all about knowing your own mind, and therefore knowing other people's minds.
And I do think that we're in an era where understanding the mind is going to be more important than it's ever been before, because whereas it used to be that you live your life and you see stuff on TV and you get bothered by it or whatever, but you're surrounded by people that are kind of able to tamp that down. Like I definitely have friends who are capable of being like, those things aren't happening. That's an internet phenomenon. Like look around, there's nothing to worry about. And it's this it's a dampening of the concern and the fear and the worry. And then there's other friends that are like, no, man, civilization is falling. This is the worst that it's ever been. You should be really, really afraid. And I think that more and more as people go into living online, they're surrounded by the latter category of friend, which is that everybody is screaming about the fact that things are collapsing and falling apart. And being able to understand the internal state and being able to actually really genuinely encounter that and be objective about it and understand it is what is going to make a civilization that doesn't shake itself apart.
It is what destroys every cell. So the thing is, it's not just hypnotizability and it's not just mentalism or these kind of tricks that scare people about psychology. It's the basic fact that you can't get away from, which is that you have an unconscious mind, and by definition, you don't know what's in there. Because it's unconscious. And that is, if I'm in a room with a physicist, that's what makes them run in the other direction, right? Because their theory is that their mind, that they know their whole mind, that they're 100% rational. You pointed to this before. They're like, I'm not biased. And that that they can know their unconscious mind somehow. Or that it doesn't exist. And what I'm fascinated by is this global phenomenon among human beings called sleep. Every day we are completely unconscious for hours on end, and yet we're like, oh, the unconscious mind doesn't matter. It literally controls us.
And the stuff that happens while you're sleeping sometimes is just unbelievable. These
Well, the
dreams
stuff
that we
we're
have.
aware of, but that's like a small percentage.
Yeah,
The rest
yeah.
we're not even aware of. What the
Right.
hell else is going on? So it's like we don't talk about it because we're terrified of the fact that we all know deep down, and maybe not so deep down, that we're being controlled by this aspect of our minds that we don't understand and we can't know, and that the only way to learn about is through psychology.
And myth. And I think that the ancients
And
had a
myth.
real good grip on this, right? They
And
didn't
art in general.
Right. There's this interpretive element where people's minds were definitely more open to magic, right? They didn't look up at the sky and see burning balls of atoms. They saw the stories, the archetypical stories that play out on Earth playing out on the sky, and they used them to talk about that, because these unconscious processes are knowable, right? In the sense that we can look at the patterns of the way that humans have behaved across time, and we can see the unconscious processes playing out.
We can do sociology and anthropology, yeah.
The scary part is saying that, oh, that bad guy was operating on the same operating system as me, and that ability is inside of me, and that's what's really terrifying, that nobody wants to look at, I feel like.
And beyond that, the idea that the things that you say that you want and the things that are on the surface that drive you are not all that there is. Because
it may not even be true.
Exactly. Like I did one of those like future authoring programs a while ago.
Yeah.
And I caught myself lying constantly. Right? As I was trying to be like, what do I want? And I was writing all this stuff down where I was like,
what should I want?
Yeah, exactly. And I had to go through it multiple times. Like I would write it out and I would look at it and I would be like, I don't think that's true. And there's nobody else in the room. Like it's me with a piece of paper and I'm just like, and so we live at a time where people really want to break with tradition. And I understand that because tradition is stultifying. It is a stricture that prevents you from being able to embody the promise of being a living creature in a boundless universe. And you want to be able to say, screw that. That doesn't matter. I am who I am. And the idea that there is an unconscious river that flows through each one of us that is the end product of everything that has ever happened in our line for all of time.
And I would argue everything that will happen.
Is horrifying, right? Because you are no longer in control of your own destiny. And
I think it's awesome, but I think it does seem horrifying, but I think it's actually a relief.
Say more, because I think
it's awesome if we can talk about it, but if we lose the ability to center these processes, like they really were central for most of humanity. I firmly believe that.
Myths or what?
Yeah, myth, I guess. If you want to call it that. Just esoteric traditions and a way of looking at this behavioral aspect as central, and the physical aspects as being sort of dirty and, secondary to the more ethereal processes that play out. But where's the place for that? Like, going back to what I asked earlier, is science a good place for that? Or have we like completely missed the boat and gotten onto the wrong ship, and science might not be the best house to actually work on these kind of projects?
Well, let's talk about what science is, because I think, again, when you talk about science, you're talking about physicalism, which is a belief system.
All I mean by science is mechanistic explanations. So cause for some effect, basically.
Yeah, so that's not actually the scientific method. So the scientific method, right, is this process. So science is a verb, right? And you know this, but like the scientific method has to do with you're inspired. That's often not talked about, but that always precedes in an actual scientist. You're inspired to ask a question. You do your best to ask the question in a way that controls for all the variables that you know about, and the ones that you don't know about, you try to control for those without knowing what they are, right? Then you look at the results, whether that is a results of a theoretical application or the results of an actual empirical investigation. And then you share those results with others, and you try to think about alternative interpretations, and you try to get feedback about alternative interpretations. And then there are new questions that arise out of that. So that's my.
But what you're
definition of
ultimately trying to
science.
do is explain something, right? I mean, that's the goal of science.
No, so I think science gets messed up when people start deciding, yes, what we want to do is be able to predict and explain. Actually,
predict is different from explanation.
Yeah, these are two different projects, I think. But
predict or explain. I think they get mixed up when you try to predict or explain. What you're trying to do is address these questions, and then there will be new questions that arise. And depending on the phase of, if you read Thomas Kuhn, depending on the phase of the scientific revolution that you're in, you will either get an explanation or you will get more questions, but you will have gotten somewhere, right? So science includes that whole process. It's not just the part where you I build a better model. Yes, that's important. Oh, I predicted. Yes, that's important. Oh, I explained something. Yes, that's important. But sometimes science is lost, and it's like, all I can do is do an experiment that creates more questions. Is that science? Yes, because you're in the process.
And
right?
So what I would say is that the act of explaining is something that spans multiple people and multiple generations, and
Yes.
is a historical project. And the scientific method is the process by which we achieve explanations.
Yeah,
and so it's
I think that is beautiful. And the idea of explaining being a historical process, now you say, and that's a mythologizing process. You're literally turning the results of science into a mythology so it can be understood.
Yes. And
so it's all about understanding.
Yeah. It's all
about understanding.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that is, but we were...
Well, the question is then, is that method the most appropriate method for understanding human behavior? Or
absolutely, because what else would you do? I mean,
I guess you do literature, you do music, you do movies, you do art, basically.
Those aren't about understanding as much as expression.
You don't think so? Right? I always come to some amazing understanding when I witness a great piece of literature.
But they're not. The project isn't about understanding.
I would say that what happens is that, for example, we will watch a lot of film. Because I think that
it's awesome.
It's the closest thing to literature in our day and age.
Sure. And what happens is that we watch something and then we'll sit around and we'll be like, what does it mean? Why did they do that?
That's the science part.
And I think that the literature or the piece itself is the thing that gets you thinking. It's what inspires you. But the process of looking at the way that people
analytics side.
That's how can you understand without analytics, right?
Well, so you can. Let's talk about that. But also, I agree that to a biologist who's studying plant forms, an inspiration might be looking at a fungal colony on a tree, right? To a sociologist who's studying how art is influenced by war, an inspiration might be looking at the Mona Lisa, right? So what inspires you is irrelevant. It's the process. And so when you say, is this a process that's legitimate to apply to X? I say, yes. Name me something that it's not legitimate to apply that process to. It's a simple process of being inspired, asking a question, trying to control variables, getting the answer, and then sharing and trying to get feedback about whether that made sense and moving on. So what I think what you're really saying is, are social sciences actually sciences? And I would say yes, because they do that process.
I think part of the reason social sciences are under such fire has to do with, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've been in the news for these reproducibility crises lately.
They've been in the news. Why have they been in the news, and why haven't, for instance, the incredible discord in physics around what time is hasn't been in the news? You can't get two physicists to agree on what time is. That's not in the news because we want the story that physicists know the truth. So, and also the Higgs boson, was that reproducible? I'm sorry, but
if you have a large hadron collider in your backyard, maybe.
Well, no, they weren't able to reproduce the mass of the Higgs boson. They found two different masses that matched the expected masses of two different groups. So it's what's in the newspaper tells you what the bias is. It doesn't tell you an explanation for how people create the bias.
Well, and I also think that there's different capacities. There's different things, right? Because there are types of social sciences where people literally just make stuff up. Like I don't remember the guy's name.
Well, not the good social sciences.
No.
Physicists who make shit up.
Of course. What I'm saying is that like the reproducibility crisis that is really played out in the newspapers has been, there were a couple of really high profile researchers who literally were just making stuff up. Like,
and then there was one article recently about a bunch of chemists who were making things up. And there are physicists literally who make things up. So what gets in the newspaper tells you what people are already biased to be against. It doesn't tell you what causes the bias.
I could see that.
But what I want to say is that, like, for example, there's I think that I don't remember his first name, but it's Gottesman, and he does a lot of research into marriage and married couples and counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is the video one, yeah.
So
this is the 5-to-1.
Yeah, I think that it's the 5-to-1 of
positive to negative.
Exactly. And the way that people interact with each other, and he can do like body language analysis, and he can predict with really great certainty, like, will this relationship survive or won't it? And it seems to be functional because he can train people to communicate in a different way, and their marriages survive when beforehand they were headed for collapse. And so it's, again, a technological thing. Like, if you can learn about some way of doing something, because you have an inspiration, you're like, well, what does it mean for a married couple to survive? And then you look at a bunch of people who are married, and you look at the ones that divorce, and you look at the ones that don't. And then you're like, okay, this is how I think this works. And then you go and you can teach people to do that. And then when you teach people to do that, they survive. It's like pretty clear that that is a functional explanation of marital harmony.
It's mechanistic.
If it had been replicated, yeah.
Is it not replicated?
I thought that you were going to use him as an example of the replication crisis. I don't think that was replicated. But it doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter because to this.
Anastasia really believed in that one. You just broke her heart. Yeah. Just because it hasn't been replicated doesn't mean it won't be, though.
Well, exactly. Just because something wasn't replicated once, especially also there's a lack of understanding that in fields that allow more complexity, like psychology allows more complexity than physics, there's going to be less replication because you don't know the factors. You don't know the factors that are affecting it the first time you got the result. It could be that it's because half of your group had caffeine that morning. And that makes a huge difference in your result. And next time no one had caffeine, they're all on a caffeine diet or whatever. And now it doesn't happen because you allow more complexity. And, the physicists who study more complex systems have a reproducibility crisis as well. It's just the more and so we can just have a general rule that if you're going to do science where there's more factors, it's going to be harder to reproduce because you don't know all the factors. That's true anywhere. So it doesn't have anything to do with social sciences or otherwise. It has to do with complexity.
I would agree with that. And I would also say that I think that it's apparent that you can understand why people do stuff. It can be hard because people lie and you can't look directly into their brains and there's a lot of unconscious stuff. But to say that the human behavior is a black box, it doesn't sit right with me, if only because of the last century of PR and marketing. Like, we know that people are driven to things really, really effectively.
Social media.
By the systems that they find themselves
Engineering.
in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can make lots of money as a psychologist working for Facebook, helping people to get more addicted.
I think they hired more psychologists than anybody else.
I think they pay them more than anybody else.
Pay them more?
I don't know if it's more.
I'm sure both of those things are probably true, but to the extent that culturally we consider psychology sort of like, oh, that's armchair stuff, it's not really real, etc., is the extent that we fall for being addicted to social media. I mean, so if we're not going to take that seriously, we're going to be manipulated by it, and that is really key here. Right? It's just like if, people who can invent a technology that will mess up your sleep and have you create dreams that are of particular concepts that then control what you think of during the day. And people are, of course, working on that. And some people have believed that they have gotten there. If people are going to say, oh, that's just silly psychology stuff, great, go ahead and be manipulated. the very tool we use to do science is the mind, and that's without exception. So if we're not going to try to understand the mind, what hope do we have of doing a good job with our science? If we don't recognize that at the end of the day, I don't care how many people you have in a room looking at the sun and saying, well, of course, we're the center of the universe. See how the sun, or the solar system, see how the sun moves around us. It's so obvious. If you don't have people to say, now, wait a minute, could our perception of this be fooling us? You're going to come to the wrong conclusion, and you're not going to know it because everyone's going to agree. And this is the key point, that the very tool you use gets undervalued. And if we keep doing that, we're going to fall for our own bullshit. We won't even know we did.
Can we talk about the precog stuff?
Oh, yeah. And let's talk about science that can create technology from unconditional love.
Yes, those are both close to my heart.
And I switched my headphones. So you're now Anastasia talking into my right ear. So that's going to be better for interpreting what you're saying.
Has that changed?
Yeah, I just swapped them
I see.
about 20 minutes ago.
Did you notice a change after you swapped them?
Yeah, my attitude towards you is more approachable because you're talking to my correct hemisphere for processing language, which is my left hemisphere.
So interesting. We got to fix that.
Yeah, so this paranormal psychology stuff.
I don't love the word paranormal, but let's just call it psychology.
Okay.
We're very green on this.
Precognitive.
Precognitive processing. Like this isn't something that this is something that we're interested in, and this is something that our audience is really interested in, but we know very little about. So you are our foray into this universe. So lead us onwards.
Yeah, can you orient us to it?
Sure. Absolutely. So precognitive processing, I'm glad you used that term. That's actually a recent term that's getting a little confused with precognition and precognitive ability. And so precognitive processing lately has been used to mean basically unconscious processing that comes before cognition. That's not what I'm talking about, although, of course, there's a relationship. Precognition has historically, since I think since about 70 years, so since the 50s, has meant the capacity to obtain accurate information about future events, not using normal means. By normal means, I mean without inference. So an example of inference in terms of prediction would be, well, it's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday. I'm starting to get tired. I bet I'm not going to finish the paper this week. And then lo and behold, you don't finish the paper. That's not precognition. You just correctly inferred, right, the situation. Not using memory. Like, well, every Thursday my mother calls and it's Thursday, so I think my mother's going to call. That's not precognition. And not direct cause. And so direct cause is, it's Thursday. On Thursdays, I like to eat popcorn for dinner. And I'm so excited that I had a dream about having popcorn for dinner. So now I'm going to make popcorn for dinner. Your dream is not precognitive. You caused it to happen. So those are the exceptions, right? Normally, when we make predictions, we make them on historical data. It's either unconscious data that we're processing or conscious data that we're processing. That's the way we believe decisions are made about predictions of future events. But there's evidence for the last 70 years, and I've done some of it, but not most of it, that you can actually set up an experiment in which the future event of interest is created by a random number generator that is only selected. In other words, the random number generator is used to select the event only in the future after you've already reported on the event. So that's the way you do all of these experiments. You record something, and that could be behavior, it could be EEG, it could be breath rate, temperature, skin conductance changes, some kind of physiological measure. It could be a conscious guess about a future event. It could be an unconscious guess about a future event. So you're recording something, then a random number generator selects the event, and then the event is revealed, right? So for example, you can record my skin conductance while I'm watching pictures on a screen. And each time, unbeknownst to me, each time before a picture is shown, there's a little random number generator that's deciding, is the picture going to be a positive one, like a picture of a sunset, or is it going to be kind of an emotional one, like a picture of someone pointing a gun at you? Which actually, I've done that experiment. I made too many people cry, and I stopped doing that experiment. But not a good experiment for undergrads who are already stressed out. Anyway, so let's say I'm measuring your skin conductance. After the experiment's over, I go and I say, okay, let's look at all the skin conductance, which is a measure of arousal, all the skin conductance measures before the decision was made to show the picture of the gun. And let's look at all the skin conductance measures before the decision was made to show the picture of the sunset. And typically you see this difference. And I was interested in this difference because it shouldn't exist, right? If we can't get information about future events in our physiology, you shouldn't see a difference beforehand when the random number generator hasn't even decided what's going to be shown, right? And it's truly random. So that's when I did a meta-analysis of, because I want to understand time. I'm really fascinated by our human experience of time and what that has to do with the physical reality of time. And so I got a bunch of experiments from a chunk from, I think it was 1978. I looked until 2011 or 2010. And I looked with a statistician who is well known for working on precognition before, Jessica Utz at UC Irvine. She had been hired by the intelligence community to look into precognition to see if it was a real thing. She established that it was a real thing. She reported on that in 1995. But anyway, I was looking at the physiology only. So we looked at 26 studies.
Did she establish that with the same methodology?
No, she was looking at the more useful form of precognition. I was looking at physiological precognition. She was looking at precognitive remote viewing. So your capacity, and also she looked at some physiological stuff. But my understanding is she was looking at what the intelligence community was interested in, which is the capacity to get information about future events before the event has occurred that could be potentially useful to intelligence for obvious reasons.
Like the Philip K. Dick book.
Like the Philip K. Dick book. Like, well, I wrote it.
Pre-crimes.
Minority
yeah,
Report.
pre-crimes.
Yeah.
Minority Report. Right, exactly. So I got really into this because, well, since I was a kid, I'd been having very detailed dreams that convinced me that time was out of order, at least in some kind of way, that it wasn't ordered in the way that we thought. So that's why I got interested. But I wanted to study it scientifically because even though I took a journal, took care to take a journal down and look at my dreams to make sure I wasn't fooling myself, I wanted to see if it could actually hold up, right, through the scientific method. And it did. And since then, I've been doing experiments both with that kind of precognition and then more lately with precognitive remote viewing, which is actually, you would think, harder to get an effect because there are more factors affecting it, but it's actually easier to find people who can do it. So on average, people's physiology seems to predict future events in some way that we don't totally understand. But there's also thoughts that seem to predict future events in some way that we also don't totally understand. And it's actually easy to train people to retrieve those thoughts.
What kind of differences are you seeing in these experiments, right? This is some sort of...
What size of difference, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the presentiment experiments, which are the physiology of precognition that I described with the skin conductance, the effect size is like 0.2, and that's been replicated, I think, 4 times in 4 additional meta-analyses that speak to that original meta-analysis. 0.2 is kind of a small effect size, but it's an effect size. The sigma is something like 8 to 10 sigma each time for physicists. So it's consistent. It's consistently small. For the precognitive remote viewing, which is on the other side of the spectrum, much larger effect sizes.
Really?
So, yeah, it's surprising because, again, those things that are more conscious are usually supposed to have more factors involved. But, I mean, it's relatively easy to get people to accurately report on simple things about the future.
So what percentage of people that you bring into the lab without any kind of training or any kind of... Because I do think that there's a selection process that must be inherent in this sort of research. The same way that not everybody is hypnotizable and according to the techniques that we know right now.
Yeah, you would think that. But it's not true.
Okay.
So like, you know how music is a skill that almost everyone can hum a tune, but like some people are really good. About 15% of people are gifted in music, and about 5% of people have amusia, which means like your rhythm's off, you can't hum a tune, right? And there's a wide swath of people in there. So it's this human capacity. I think precognition is like that, because otherwise I wouldn't get the results I get with unselected participants. So I do lab experiments, but the lab experiments are out in the world. So I literally have M-Turkers, Amazon Mechanical Turk workers signing up to do these. They don't even know it's an experiment about precognition. And on average, you still get these results. So I think it's more like music. I think the reason we don't talk about it is the taboo. So I think most people have this capacity. There's a taboo against it. People think you're crazy, especially in academic circles. That can't be real because this is how time works, etc. And so there are these gifted people that, frankly, anyone who studies this have to admit, like, these people are very gifted at this. But some of them are really messed up because of the taboo and being told they're crazy and stuff. And so it's harder and harder, the more the taboo is there, to get the 3%, the top 3%ers who are going to be friggin' awesome, without them also being mentally unbalanced, having had difficult lives, difficult to work with.
Is there instrumentalization of these techniques? Like,
there are many people working on that. By many, I mean compared to how it used to be.
Are there any employees? Like, has the CIA are they hiring people as precogs? Like, to what extent is this a useful skill? Because I think that's maybe. I mean, I don't know anything about it, but it seemed to me that if you can't train somebody in it, then maybe that's why it hasn't ascended to that technological throne.
Yeah, because
you can train someone in it. It's just the taboo.
Okay, so
and there is a gifted. I mean, like, you can train someone to play piano, but some people are super gifted.
Yeah, right? yeah, exactly. And so, like, I think that what you're suggesting is that if it was widespread and it was possible for everybody to do it and to be doing it, and it was, like you think in Minority Report, right? There's a room full of people and they're the precogs and they're deciding who's going to commit the crime. And the first moment that there's a police department or some state agency that has that, everybody is suddenly going to be like, well, we knew all along.
Or an app that allows you to track your progress, like you can sit there and get better at it or something.
Like, I think that people really do like to be able to have these sorts of markers for progress or markers for success. And there's not a lot of that in the world for these sorts of abilities because, like you say,
there are a lot of that in the world. It's just like you don't know about them.
Well, no, what I'm saying,
I can tell you
that there's not an opportunity to practice these abilities in a way where people are supportive. Like, if you're like, I'm learning to play piano, people are like, oh, that's cool.
Oh, right.
Like, I'm learning to predict the future. People are like,
that's nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
You're crazy.
Yeah. And
right. But there are circles of support. So, like, just so you know, I want you to know there's multiple apps out there where people are training themselves to do this. One is called RV Trainer. One is called ESP Trainer. One is called RV Tournament. Yeah, I think the one I was thinking was RV Trainer. It's called RV Tournament. ESP Trainer came out of a NASA study on ESP. In terms of answering the CIA question, so one of my big interests is working with the intelligence community to understand how to use this skill. So last couple of years, I've been interfacing with people who know about the CIA and what it might do. One of my great collaborators is Carmen Medina, who spent 30 years at the executive level doing analysis at the CIA. Anyway, she and I did a South by Southwest talk about using precognition in the intelligence community, and I think there's a real value there. And I think that you maybe wouldn't hear about it like everywhere if the CIA decided to start doing that, but I think it's something that is not a bad thing to consider because of the different types of minds. If you acknowledge that it's a skill that some people have that's undeniable, it's not clear why you wouldn't try to find a way to use that. And also, that's one thing. So people who are already skilled. And then in terms of training the people who have the taboo to use their intuitive insight and to think precognitively so that they can do better foresight is clearly obvious. It's like, why not incorporate this into our pantheon? If we're not going to be afraid of being crazy, which is really the only thing stopping us, since the intelligence community has already said in 1995 that precognition is real, we don't understand it, why not use it? So, that's definitely on the forefront of my mind.
How is this different from a gut feeling?
Oh, so it might not be. Okay. So a gut feeling is a description of one way that precognition could be expressed. So a gut feeling means that the way you're feeling it is in your gut, right? You could also, some people get heart flutters or they get chills, right? These are just different physical manifestations of intuition. And intuition is like an umbrella term. One of the pieces of intuition is precognition. So if you believe precognition exists, and unfortunately there is a question of belief because people have a skeptical view on anything controversial that comes up in psychology that goes counter to our experience of the way time works, right? But if you're going to decide, okay, maybe precognition exists, the only place to kind of put it is in the umbrella of intuition, which also includes things like expert intuition. So people who are very skilled at their, whatever it is that they've studied, just have intuition in that area, and they don't even bother tracing back the rationale. It just comes up like, oh, this is the next best theory, or this is the next best experiment that feels right in my tummy. I had a mentor once say, that feels right in my tummy. That's the next experiment. You know, we don't have to parse it out. We can just say intuition includes all of it. I don't care when I'm using precognition and when I'm using expert intuition, or when I'm using unconscious processing of sensory events that never raise to consciousness but go into a funnel that lead to a decision. I don't care. Like, I'm just going to learn to follow my intuition. But one of the best ways to train people in intuition is to train them in precognitive tasks where they have no capacity to use their analytical skill to answer the question. And this comes back to what you were saying about analysis, that what do you think you said? The way to get answers is only through analysis. And what I'm saying is that is the belief that is incorrect. The way we actually get answers is through intuition, and then we rationalize using our analytical function. And we say, this is why it occurred to me. But there's no very good scientist that I know that will literally say they get answers with analysis. They have an insight, and then they explain the insight. And this insight is from intuition.
And so what are the processes by which you train precognitive tasks?
So, I mean, do you want me to take you through it?
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Okay, so do you have a piece of paper you can write on? And so also the audience, like, grab a piece of paper, and don't do this on a computer tab or on your phone. Literally grab a piece of paper with a pen. Because you're going to use your mind differently with a piece of paper and a pen. Okay, so now for 30 seconds. Well, first we're going to write down a number. So we're going to write down the number 329, name three other digits. 329
648.
Okay, the number is 329648. Okay, that's going to be what's called your tag. It's going to associate what the tasking is, which will be in the future, which we'll randomly determine, with what you're about to do. What you're about to do is called an open collector, and it's a stream of consciousness collector of every word and image that comes into your head for the next 30 seconds. Okay, don't think about it too much. Go. I'm timing you. All right, done. Great. Okay, so you're like, what the heck? So that's just stream of consciousness. It's just stuff, right? Stuff that's floating around in your head and that came out. So now what we're going to do, and this is the task that you do over and over again when you're training people, this stuff is basically something like this, not exactly this. Now we're going to associate that number, which was what?
329648.
This is very weird, but we're going to associate that number with a task. So now we're going to associate with the task. So the task is, please describe the video that we're about to watch. Okay. So now I'm going to show you this on my screen. Oh, you don't have screen sharing? I've got 4 links to YouTube. I don't know what they're of. I forget. They're just some taskings I have sitting around. But just try this. We could totally edit this out.
Yeah, we can switch over to screen share.
Yeah, let me switch over so you can screen share. 1 second.
Okay, because I want to convince you that I didn't know the answer before I did this.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. We can edit this.
This is You notice we're reversing the order. So usually you have a question and there's an answer. And what we're doing is we're giving the answer and then we're going to find out what the question was. And this is how you force the mind to think very creatively because you cannot get analytical with this stuff. So
All right.
I'm gonna share. Here are my 4 YouTube links. Do you see those?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
These are all physiology videos. So pick a number between 1 and 4.
Silently?
Or no, just tell me because we're going to have one of them be the target.
2.
Okay, so it's the second one. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and queue up this video. This will be our target. So the goal is to describe this target. But before I play the video, how about if you tell me what you wrote on your sheet?
What we think that the video is going to be about?
No, what did you write on your sheet? Just don't worry about what the video is.
Just our list of words?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'll let you go ahead, Dr.
This
Benderbury.
is a hilarious list. Blue cup table, ear, pain, coffee, oh my god, battery, lifeblood, cry, emotion, collection, we, canvas, process.
Cool. About yours.
I wrote down Mingus, sunshine, planets, light, music, time, and dreams.
Okay,
That's as far as I
great.
go.
I have no idea what they have to do with this target. Let's just watch the target. They may have nothing to do with the target, but I'll explain in a second.
The video shows a typical euglena. Euglena does not have a rigid cell wall, usually referred to as a pellicle, so the shape changes as the organism moves.
So there's like an amoeba crawling across the stage here.
So that's just a target. So a target is just an event, and the event is showing you the video. So what we would do if this were actually an experiment and not training is we would already collect what you wrote down before selecting the target. Then we would get a bunch of these, go to an independent judge and ask them without knowing what the target was to rank the similarity between what you wrote down and this video and a dummy video. And they wouldn't know which was the target. And then they scale it from 1 to 5, which is most like this one, which is most like that one. And then you can do statistics on the judges actually choose the target versus this other. That's how you would do it in an experiment. In training, what I say to you is what's really valuable is to ask the question, how would you relate those things to the video you just saw? And how would you not relate them? How could you? So do the experiment of relating everything you wrote down to the video. This is an analytic task. And then do the experiment of relating everything you wrote down to something that's absolutely not the video. And see how hard each of those is. And what it does is it expands your relationship between your intuitive mind that could not possibly speak to your analytical mind in any other way, right? And your analytical mind, which wants to know the answer, but can't know the answer when the question hasn't been asked. Does this make sense?
I didn't grasp what the number was about, the tag number at the beginning.
Oh, that is just to fool your analytical mind into thinking that there's some kind of technology going on.
So it sounds like there's a pretty significant interpretive capacity for this. So the people who are the judges, do they know that they're evaluating a precognitive process?
It depends on the experiment. So sometimes you could just ask people, like, which is like on MTurk, which of these descriptions most fits this picture, or these two pictures, or which picture most fits this one description, depending on how you do it. Or you can use people who know it's a precognitive process, but they don't know which is the target. So the point is, if you're going to do it as an experiment, you have to show that it's not just confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is our bias that the thing that we thought was true is true, right? And so if you tell them, here's the target, show how likely this is to match, that's not a good experiment, right?
Yeah.
Because they'll say it matches. You don't do that if you're a good experimenter. You present two videos, One is a picture of the Sears Tower exploding. The other is a picture of the Euglena. You show them your two pieces and you say, of these two videos, which, for each of these descriptions, which would most match? Like, that's a reasonable experiment. But in training, the task is to not worry about any of that stuff about being right. It's about using your mind to be flexible in getting to know itself, right?
Yeah, because one thing that's interesting is that I would probably never in a million years be sitting here coming up with words that would be anywhere close to the Sears Tower exploding. But
I think I would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, like right?
Maybe yours was closer to that.
Well, yeah, because I think that we have different set points for the way that we see the world and the things that are just kind of like the baseline of dark versus light.
You do. It's clear. And so if I were working with you on a team and you were the precogs, right? I would know, Anastasia, that if I get something from you, it's always going to have a little darkness in it, even if the target is like a puppy dog who was born and everything's good, right? And so, but I would filter that out as the analyst because you're always going to give me that. And then I would look beyond that about what's different between different targets, you see? So you start to get to know, like working on a missing persons case is the classic example. You have a team of people who are really skilled, you've already vetted them, and you ask them where the missing person will be found. You already know so-and-so is like a conspiracy theory nut and he's going to give you something about UFOs and whatever. You ignore that and you look at all the other stuff because that's the stuff that actually differs between different tasking and tells you anything. So the stuff that you know about yourself is the stuff that ends up becoming like the noise, and the signal is the stuff that sneaks through. It's kind of a fun little mystery interpretive process.
And I think that that's why it's so difficult for people to come in from the outside and to look at it and be like, I accept this as being the case, because there is so many levels of it that need to be interpreted and filtered and considered before coming to the
It's
answer.
also not a neat mechanistic presentation, right? It's not like I assume that we're going to talk about this in a moment with regard to your conception of time, but when people ask the question, well, okay, this is statistically significant, like, that's interesting, but what could cause this? How did it
work?
How did it happen?
How did it work? Yeah, right. Well, those are both the important things, and so I just want to again make the point that this was a demonstration of the method. It wasn't a demonstration of two really skilled people doing it. And so when people would say there's a lot of interpretation, yes, you're not very skilled at this. That's okay. We could learn over time. But also there are people who are just naturally very skilled. And if you were one of those people, you would already know, because you would already be having your whole life like, wow, this popped into my head that, Egypt would whatever, and then now Egypt is whatever. And so you would know pretty early on if you were one of those very skilled people. So just so you know, with those people, less interpretation, more just paying attention. But when you're doing unselected studies and you want to learn to train, you want to train as many people as possible because you think it's super cool, then you work with anyone who wants to be trained. Does that make sense?
It's fascinating. We were on a hike the other day and we ran into a couple in the woods.
I was going to bring that up too. No, you take it away.
I really like mushroom hunting, and it's mushroom season. It's starting to rain, but it's been kind of cold, and so you go in the woods and there's a lot of little brown mushrooms, and they smell kind of good, but they're not in any of the mushroom ID books. And because everybody knows that if you eat the wrong mushroom, your liver will liquefy and you will die a slow and painful death, I'm very skeptical about picking mushrooms that smell good, even if I don't know what they are. And we run into this couple in the woods. It's like probably 35 degrees. They're barefoot, wearing really light clothes, and the lady is carrying a basket of mushrooms, and they're the little brown mushrooms. And I'm like, oh, how do you know that you can eat those? And the guy is like, they're not in the book, but we set an intention and we found these and we believe that the mushrooms won't kill us.
I hope it works.
Right?
And we were both walking away like, man, I wish I could live like that. In a sense, I don't know that it's
I hope they're okay. And if they are okay, there is something about that of being able to trust that you are right about the things that you encounter. Because I'm naturally so skeptical about my intuitions. And I think that this is another piece of why people don't listen to their intuitions, because let's be honest, living in modernity is very frightening. you have no
For you, apparently. Yes.
well, I mean, I think that
Well, not
it's the
just for
spirit of the
us,
times.
No,
Like,
I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
yeah,
We're
for
talking
me,
about the dark
definitely.
side.
I mean, I think about this a lot. Like, if I go through my family history, it's like 3 generations of people running from repressive regimes, lots of like mental illness, alcoholism, like terrible darkness. Like, my mom tells me stories about the family, and I'm like, I have turned out much better than expected. You know, like this could have gone much worse. And so I definitely think that there's this like weight of history that creates it, but I think that living in modern times is pretty hard because everything feels very uncertain. And I think that everybody's gut feeling is that it's not okay. Maybe I'm totally overstating, and a bunch of people are going to come out and they're going to
Just
be
civilization in general.
yeah, like it feels at like really, really uncertain times more than it was before social media and the internet and all of these things that are turning over our experience of the last 100 years and our experience of the last 20,000 and then like millions of years. And I think that living in this space requires you to put a damper on your intuition of, is this good? Is this okay? Because if you really listened to your gut feeling of, oh man, this isn't okay, and I can't work this corporate job because it's not okay, then you're in a position where you're like, well, if I don't work the corporate job, where do I get my salary? How do I survive? How do I make my way in the world if I
Yes.
open myself up to the intuition that this isn't okay?
Well, and intuition, exactly, and intuition lives exactly. Intuition lives, starts in the unconscious, where all your feelings that you're pushing down and trying not to feel also live. So those are the arguments for people not paying attention to the intuition. On the downside, your intuitive systems are actually demonstratively more accurate than your analytical systems. Like, I get that people think that that's not the case. And I'm not talking about walking into the forest and randomly eating mushrooms because you decide that it's okay. I'm talking about intuitions that you pay attention to, and then you check. Like this is system 1 and system 2 in psychology. This is Kahneman and Tversky. They talk about system 1 being the intuitive system. It is faster. System 2 being the analytical system, and it's slower. They mostly talk about system 1 being biased, but of course system 1 creates system 2, so that means system 2 is biased too, and it turns out system 2 is actually more biased because it's layered on top of system 1. In any case, people have forgotten that everyone's going to be wrong sometimes, but you have to check out your intuitions with the analysis layered over it with reality, right? So you have an intuition about these mushrooms. That's great. You have the intuition. So you can very quickly find the mushrooms. You feel good about it. And then you go to Google and you go to a trusted resource and you check to see whether they're going to fucking kill you. So this is why I'm always walking this delicate line and talking about this stuff, because, you know, the only way intuition, insights, creativity, precognition is going to be valuable in our navigation of the future. And by the way, I didn't answer this question earlier. Israel actually already has a program with their intelligence community related to precognition. But anyway, coming back. The only way that that's going to be valuable is if people don't go, well, I know it's true because my intuition told me. That's how you go to conspiracy theory world, right? So I'm not going to pay any attention to the data. I'm going to now claim that because I'm a really good precog, I know that, you know, tomorrow the aliens are going to land and they're going to make everything peachy or whatever your theory is. And so that's not okay either, right? Like this is about incorporating a human skill that we know exists, intuition, determining whether it includes precognition, which I believe it does based on the data, and then deciding how that can be incorporated into navigating the world better, right? That's a sane way to go about it. You need both of those systems. So I just want to underscore that, because this can easily go off into conspiracy theory land, and it can go in both directions. People can get super rationalizing and super analytical and claim that their analysis is correct, and it's completely wrong, and it's very logical, right? So that has to be checked too. So it's this interplay between this emotional stuff that we don't want to look at, but frankly, everyone has trauma, and we have to, 83% of the world or something has trauma, and we have to look at it in order to move forward. And this sort of above the line, or above the iceberg, above the water stuff of the conscious stuff we're aware of and rationalize, that we can't buy into either, because it's not always right either. So it's really knowing our own minds.
What do you make of
using them well?
Sorry, what do you make of there's also literature that comes out that says, intuition can't be trusted. We're duping ourselves. Do you think this has to do with the way that people's intentions express themselves in their experimental design? Or, it seems like it's almost possible to prove anything statistically if you get the right sample size together or whatever.
I think that, so those are two different questions. In terms of intuition not being trusted, that's not what intuition is for. Intuition is to spark something for you to go check out, right? It's to help you think about something that maybe you weren't thinking about before. Like, I have this intuition that my kid is going to need help getting a job rather than just get a job on his own. I don't care if that comes from precognition or from my knowledge of my kid, right? I'm going to then ask him, like, do you need a little help with that? I'm going to check it out, right? The role of intuition is not to be trusted. It's to inspire us to go check things out, things that we weren't previously thinking about. And so it's not like, that's not its job. It's like saying, my dream didn't, explicitly reveal to me the answer to the question if you're Kekulé trying to look at the structure of benzene. It's like, well, no, it talked about snakes. But then you interpreted that. It inspired you to interpret that into the structure of this hexagon.
Yeah, the provenance of inspiration in general, or of really just thoughts, is something that is really poorly understood, and it's a fascinating subject of where these things come from. Or if you're an artist, I do music, but it's often like when the best pieces of music come to me, they really do come fully formed. I know that ideas come to us that way. We have a thought. Well, what is that exactly? What do you mean you have a thought?
Well, what do you mean? Where did they come from? And we kind of conveniently ignore that and say, can't trust intuition. Well, where do you think your thoughts come from? Like, did you design that thought? No, you didn't. It appeared in your head. Don't lie. But the fear is back to, oh my God, if I didn't control where the thought came from, if there's no mechanism that I understand in some kind of reductionistic way, then that means I'm not in control.
Oh, can we talk about mechanism though? Do you are you willing to speculate on the cause of these precognitive abilities? Is this a matter of us being physically tied to one another at the atomic level, or what's going on exactly?
Well, so just to clarify, precognition is about receiving information about future events. They don't necessarily have to be in relationship to another person. That's telepathy. Whole different thing, right? And people who are good at precognition tend to be pretty good telepaths, but I haven't proven that. I just noticed it. So
God, we could use one of these people around the house.
Apparently we can train. We have apps.
That's right.
It doesn't mean you're going to be gifted, but you'd probably be better.
How do they do it?
So that's the question. How do they do it? So first of all, no one knows. Second of all, I have theories. So I think based on the data, I think there's two kinds of precognition that sort of mechanistically. I think one kind is in the light cone. Does your audience know what a light cone is? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the light cone, in the body, so physical, kind of like this.
Well, maybe we should define it then, because I'm probably coming from like a physics standpoint.
Okay, so a light cone is a sort of, it's a concept that describes, the reason it's shaped like a cone is it's using 2 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, so it sort of looks 3-dimensional. And so if you imagine, top of the cone, bottom of the cone, and on the top of the cone is the future, on the bottom of the cone is the past, and right where my nose is the present. Okay, and then over here is somewhere else in space, and over here is somewhere else in space. But this is the here and now, where my nose is. Okay, kind of nasal. So this light cone is always moving with you, right? So I'm always at this place in my light cone. But there, you could imagine some brain processes that are time symmetric. And that's because physical equations are almost entirely time symmetric. So you could imagine brain processes, so neurons firing, that send ripples back in time over maybe seconds, time frame, let's say. And that you could travel like this, if my nose is the present, just slightly around the light cone to communicate information. So that's what I would call the presentiment or quick precognition on the seconds to milliseconds time scale. Now ask this question, and you'll see why it matters so much to me that we count mental things as being different from physical things. Ask the question of, what about this kind of precognitive remote viewing where I can do a session like that, and then I can pull the session out a week later and it'll help me solve a missing persons case, or someone on my team can do that. So, and that's been validated. It's not just me. Like, that's over days, and sometimes it can be over months or years. So how do you explain that with the light cone in the brain? There's so much other stuff going on in the brain. How could that possibly be a little wiggle back in time? Also, how the heck does that even happen? Because there's no physiological thing going on. You actually don't see the event you're predicting. It's a mental construct of someone tells you, oh, the person's body washed up on the beach in this location, right? And that's in the future anyway. So the way I conceive of that is, first of all, I imagine that mental objects don't follow the same rules as physical objects. They're very, very different. They don't follow the same rules. Therefore, you can get information about a mental object at any point in time. And what is required to do that is intention. So your intention to get that information, which is another mental object. The rules for mental objects are that intentions allow you to retrieve them. I intend to remember when I was 3 years old. I intend to think about my mother. I intend to get information about the future. So it's these different rules that bring them in. Now, we don't understand how those work in a physical sense, but they're not physical, so I don't think we will. But we can understand mechanisms. We can make box and stick mechanisms and test theories about how they work in a mental sense, because they are mental objects. So
it makes sense to me that like a neuron could time travel backwards, because that's essentially a memory, and then that inferences could be made based on that retrieval of the way that patterns have unfolded in the past and extrapolating them into, obviously the closer future is going to be easier to predict than the past. And so I wonder if the mechanism isn't just some sort of associative mining of these processes in the.
But how do you explain the random number generator results? So how is based on that model? Like, I still think it has to be within the light cone, but I think it's literally moving back and forth in the light cone, because in that model, you're using a random number generator in the future. The body's already responding differently depending on what the future event is.
I mean, it's definitely.
It's a conundrum.
It's for sure that.
And this is I was going to say it's inexplicable, right? Because if you observe something and you're like, look, I can measure it, I can parameterize it, I can show that there is the effect. And the answer to, well, how is this happening is we don't know yet. I think that that's okay, because the process of explanation takes a really long time. It's not necessarily inside the body of a single person.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but I wouldn't say it's inexplicable. I mean, you can really say, like, look, our perception of the order of time really is a stubbornly persistent illusion, and it's really perceptual. And physical reality, of course, the future thing already exists. I mean, there is the block world idea. Of course, the thing already exists. Maybe the mind or the brain works in such a way that it gets pings off of that future event. I mean, it's not inexplicable. It's just difficult to test those kind of explanations, right?
Well, you say that the thing already exists. And so if you have, let's say you have, I mean, the thing already has to exist because matter cannot be created or destroyed. And so the same matter that exists now will exist in the future. And there's a rearrangement of, like, for example, if you have a bunch of atoms and they rearrange into a benzene ring, like the benzene ring didn't exist, but the atoms existed. And so is what you say that it exists, is it that the atoms existed in some state before they coalesced into the new form?
Oh, no, I'm talking about like the block world idea of I shouldn't have said a thing. I should have said an event. Each physical event already exists through the entire history of the universe, right? That's the block world idea. Because otherwise, when someone's traveling with a higher acceleration than you and they get to the future faster than you, how do you explain if all of a sudden there's nothing to see because that event somehow only exists when you get there, right? This is Minkowski space-time, right?
We tend to think of that as a absurd mathematical abstraction of something which
exactly, but it's still physics that holds, right? And so I it's the same thing as like shut up and calculate with quantum mechanics. It's like, yes, it's an absurd mathematical abstraction, but what are the implications if it were true, right? I
think a lot of it comes down to defining. I guess maybe we should have done this immediately, but what is time? Like, how do we want to define it?
Have done that.
Right.
How are we going to do that? That's like the hottest question in physics right now.
Well, we have our own take on it. I mean, obviously the physicists say that time, when Einstein was working on his equations, he really just meant what clocks do. And a lot of those spooky things start to make a lot more sense when you think about clocks being material.
Well, he thought way more deeply about time than that. I mean, he was very disturbed by not being able to explain time. He wrote a whole treatise on it. I mean, it wasn't just what clocks do. He got it that there's a problem there.
There's a problem, yeah. So how do you define time?
I don't think people can define time. I wrote a chapter on it in a book about consciousness that I co-wrote with Julia Mossbridge. It's called Transcendent Mind. But you can categorize different types of time. Like time is like a fundamental like I think time is fundamental. I also wrote this little piece about the birth of the universe, and that time is obviously the mother.
But time measures change, right? Undoubtedly. We use time, like we have some standard of change, right? Some periodic system. And then we compare the motion of some other process to that standardized motion.
You're talking about the standard physical time, which is about duration or the passage of time. But there's also order, which some physicists believe don't require time. They think of one thing coming first before another thing, as if it's timeless, which I think is not correct. But anyway, that's what some physicists think, right? And then there's also synchrony. This question that Einstein it's a deep question about time, synchrony. And it tells you a lot about how time must work, right? Which is why you get the block universe from that. And so these things are different. They're orthogonal. They're almost like orthogonal dimensions of time. And those are just physical. And then there's mental dimensions of time, right? So there's how time feels like it flows versus in increments, right? There's memory, there's prospection, prediction. And there's this unified concept of the self, which is reliant on time. There's actual conscious human experience that doesn't exist without time. And that's why I say it's at least fundamental for human experience, if not fundamental for the entire universe, because we try to bury it, we try to spatialize it, we try to get away from it, but we continually find ourselves asking questions like what happened before the Big Bang. It's almost as if we know that time is fundamental, but we don't want it to be because it's so hard. And I'm sorry for dropping the F-bomb, but it's really like...
You're welcome to drop as many F-bombs as you'd like. It's
really fucking hard. I mean, like, there are physicists you've got Lee Smolin over here talking about how time is fundamental, and then you've got Julian Barber talking about how there's no such thing as time, and they're both using physical arguments to support their ideas. Meanwhile, they're not discussing the crucial aspect of time, which is this human created. I mean, we really do know that human experience of time is different than the physical reality of time. That we know, right? And so we're not discussing the relationship between those, which is how we figure it all out in the first place. So we are just in the beginning, I think, of a century of really trying to understand time. So I think it's fine that we didn't try to define it. We were never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, Julian Barber did not take kindly to us proposing that perhaps there was a human element to his model of the universe. We were talking...
It's the only time anybody almost walked out on one of these podcasts.
He told me that he was not there to be lectured to, which I thought I put that as a feather in my cap.
Now
that is awesome. Take down the physicist.
Well, because I mean, like, it was weird, right? Because there is in most of Big Bang physics, there is this tendency to be like, look, there is a frame, and that frame is the right frame. And then when you're like, yeah, but you just made that frame up, people get upset.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I don't know how to think about being able to see things that haven't happened yet, and whether or not those things have already in some way occurred, right? I don't like to use the word exist for it, because I think that it's important to delineate between things that
Matter
are
and events.
exactly,
Yeah.
and
Or
because
ideas.
events require time and matter doesn't. Yeah, it's very different.
yeah, exactly. An event is a movie of something that happens, and a thing is just a thing. Like, it doesn't matter how much time is like.
Yeah, materials are static.
And so it's hard for me to consider that events have already
It's
occurred.
very deterministic.
It is very deterministic, and so maybe that's why I don't
kills
like
our sense
it.
of free will.
Yeah, because I'm like, well, if it's deterministic to that way, can you really change it?
This is what Minority Report's all about, right?
Yeah, we're back to the Minority Report.
Yeah.
That is always the question it comes down to, and this comes back to also people's desire for control. So there's a lot of physicists who will die on the hill of free will. Like, look, I wrote this paper on how we can still use my theory and still have free will. Like, it's a desperation. And I come from the neuroscience world. And in the neuroscience world, we're all kind of like whispering, like, do they understand that, like, there's no evidence of free will? Like, do they understand that our story about free will is clearly a story that's fed to us by our brains that would like us to feel like we're in control? Like, there's not a lot of evidence for free will when it comes to, if you're talking about, actually, the issue with free will comes down to whose free will. So if you're talking about the free will of an individual person's conscious awareness of what's going on in the world, I would say there's absolutely no free will in that, because the conscious awareness of what's going on in the world is a story of what just happened, including a story of what I want and what I did and why I did it. So there's no free will in that. That's a movie, right? That's predetermined. But if we're talking about, if you're going to include the unconscious mind that is in connection with the rest of physical reality and that is being fed and interacted with on a quantum level and also a classical level by all of physical reality and also itself and the conscious awareness, then yeah, of course there's free will. But that's part of physical reality. So that would be in what we're calling predeterminism, is really a description, a beautiful description of the entire universe as it happens all at once.
Okay, so then it's suddenly, if you consider that there is no free will and that there is a determinism that is on the basis of the organization of everything that is, right? Everything is in relationship to itself already. Then when you are standing at the cusp of a decision tree or a decision point of what will happen next, there's already the kind of the resonant knowledge of which way the domino will fall. Yeah. And so I can imagine that
it may not be conscious, yes. You might not be trained to pick up on it, but it's there.
Exactly. And so then that actually, if you start from the place of there is determinism that is on the basis of everything that is and everything that has happened and the way that it is all physically and unconsciously and emotionally organized, then it's suddenly then there's a mechanism, because what you're really asking is, you're like, well, what state will the system fall into next? And you're like, well, there's only one state that the system can fall into next, and it falls into that state. And when you sense the direction that it's going to fall, like,
that's called precognition. Yeah.
Okay. And so that if you take determinism as a starting point, then that's the mechanism. It is that everything. Yeah. It is that everything already is, and you're just kind of sensing that, like, that void that you have to fall into.
With a caveat, which is you've just described how it can happen, but not the mechanism. You described the physical aspect of this predetermined whole of the universe being calculated. But what you've sort of hidden in that description is that in terms of mental aspects, the mind, separate from the brain, separate from the body, the mind can do what it wants, right? So the mind gets to go, well, now I'm going to attend to that future event and get information, bring it back. And now even though I know tomorrow my house is going to be on fire, I can be prepared for it mentally. That's a different deal.
Yeah.
And that's the mechanism that actually needs explaining, is how the mind interacts with the physical reality. So if you think that the mind doesn't exist, see, this was why it's so important for me to point out that the mind exists. If you think that the mind doesn't exist, there's no reason to explain the mechanism of how the mind can do this and why the mind matters. But
who thinks that the mind doesn't exist?
many people don't, like, so people think that consciousness is just a it's a trick, it's a figment of our imagination. So it's all physical, and we're just like, this is what.
It's just like atoms bumping into each other, and it just happens to be that there's an experience of self.
And this is a Daniel Dennett idea. There's this illusion of experience, but you're not actually experiencing anything.
I don't like that.
Well, it's provably false. Like, how about if I get a beat it? Maxwell Maltz has a famous quote, "I don't have to wait for the advance of neuroscience to know I've been stung by a bee."
And I mean, I think that this is also kind of what Hoffman is talking about with the summation of the conscious agents, right? Where the mind is a conscious agent. And if the mind is an antenna that is able to sense the state of the conscious agents, then the ability of the mind to reach forward and to kind of predict where that resonance is going to go, it's kind of like expecting the resolution of a chord, right? You hear the beginning of a melody, and then you're like, I know where that's going to go, because I'm
picking up on these quantum whatevers,
or just some interval that you know how it sounds. Like if you listen to a Western scale, you have an intuition. If you listen to an Arabic scale, you might not. If you there's this amazing YouTube video of a guy who made a guitar that plays like all the semitones in Turkish music, and it's a crazy fretboard. It has hundreds.
They're microtones, they're smaller than semitones, actually.
You're right. Yeah. And so it's like hundreds of tones on this guitar that you wouldn't ever have in a Western scale, and so it's harder to predict that.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a resonant aspect to it of the universe as a Chladni plate, where as you sweep the frequency, it falls into place. And if the mind is able to sense the frequency or the resonance that has come down the pipe, then it can sense the frequency that is going to resolve.
Right, but I just want to say that's a mechanism for inference and for the mind as a machine, like a machine learning system, right? That's what the unconscious mind does. But that's different from precognition. So the idea of precognition is you literally can't predict it from the past, right? The random number generator is truly random, and it occurs in the future, unless you propose, and this is the way I would take your idea and put it into this path in terms of mechanism, unless you propose that the mind is capable of picking up on that future random number generator, because there are rules that allow this particular chord of random numbers to end in a certain way, and you've unconsciously picked up on those. Maybe that's true. Like maybe we unconsciously pick up on quantum fluctuations, and we know, even though they seem stochastic, that there's this pattern, not consciously, but subconsciously, and that would explain it.
Like so if you moved the random number generator away from the person,
so I do these online. Like the random number generator is on some server, and then the person is around the world.
It reminds me, one time I was listening to this interview with Grandmaster Flash, who's this musician, and he was talking about his method, and it was just like the craziest description I ever heard of the artistic process, but it really got into me. And he said he does this process called art detection, which is that when he sits down to make a record, he starts by imagining the people at the Grammy ceremony or wherever, or at the performance of it, reacting to the piece. It's already done. He's already seeing their faces and their hearts and minds responding to it. And he just starts to calculate backwards how to get from that point back to standing in the studio making the notes happen. And it's this really interesting way of actually envisioning things happening from the future backwards. I don't know. It's
a very useful creative tool. I do it for experiments. Like I see in my mind's eye the figure in the paper. And I go, well, what are the axes? Like, what am I showing? Oh my God. Oh, that makes sense. It's very helpful.
I love that.
I mean, we're at
2 hours.
2 hours, and we have not
Not bad.
but we have not gotten to love. I think that we should put a pin in it just
And
to be able
do
to breathe a
love.
little bit and do love on a different day.
Yeah.
What do you think?
We'll do love. Yeah. If we ever have a chance in the next coming years to do love, I'd love to talk about love, because there's a science of love that I'm trying to promote. And, it's also, I like to take these taboo items and say that they're important. So, of course, that's what I'm going to say. But we can talk about it, whether that's real or not.
I think that love is, this goes back to what Shiloh said earlier in the conversation about what we were talking with Carl Friston about, which is that we are creating portals into the world that are these artificial intelligence systems. And we program them with all kinds of ideas, and we give them all these texts, and we train them off of the detritus of what's produced on the internet, which I think lends itself to the terror around AGI, because if you can't, there's not a lot of love on the internet.
Well, it's just simple. If we don't know how to raise children, we're not going to know how to create an AGI that's loving. I mean, the AGI revolution is going to help us solve parenting, because we have to solve the AGI. We actually care more about AGIs and how they behave than we do about our children. And so, of course, there's a whole history to that. So if we can start to use AGI as an excuse to understand parenting, we're going to have a revolution. It'd be very powerful.
I think that you're right about that, and I think that's going to make for a really good conversation down the line.
Yeah, fun.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Mossbridge.
Thank you.
Where can people, before you go,
Shiloh.
where can folks learn more about your work? Do you have a website you want to plug, or do you mess with social media or anything like that?
I do mess with social media. My favorite social media is LinkedIn, because I just post things that I'm interested in. So, hook up with me there. And I also have a blog on Medium. So I wrote the thing that people in this conversation might be most interested in is a serial essay I wrote, Practical Time Travel for Everyday Mystics. And it brings up these issues of mental and physical objects, time travel, what it means to do time travel. And the other piece that I wrote that I think might be interesting is called How to Avoid the Time Wars. And that's also on Medium.
Excellent. We'll link those in the description.
Cool.
And I just want to plug my nonprofit that I co-founded with Wolfram Alderson called the Institute for Love and Time. So we focus on time travel, specifically mental time travel, and how that improves well-being, and trying to study unconditional love in some kind of useful scientific way.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Thank
Cool.
you so much.
Everybody go check it out. And thanks for coming by.
Thanks so much.
We'll see you soon.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.
Also, thanks for, we're off, right?
Mhm.
Hey, I switched twice. It really made such a big difference. Whenever I was feeling a little grumpy, I switched it so that the person who was speaking that I was being grumpy with could go into the other ear. And it really made a difference. So that's interesting. I loved this conversation. I hope it wasn't too long-winded. I really think we went through a lot of territory.
I think that there are ideas that are really challenging, because I think that you keyed into something really early, which is that we do come from a very strict scientific tradition. And I appreciate that you're very strong in your defense of a different kind of science.
Well, you come from a very strict physicalist scientific tradition. I come from neuroscience. I mean, it's, same tradition.
Yeah.
But I've had to learn in neuroscience to defend whatever. The only reason anyone ever goes into neuroscience is because they're interested in the mind.
And then you start cutting up rats and chopping up their brains, and you're like, I don't know about this.
I don't understand how this is getting us to the mind. It happens to every neuroscientist. You talk to every neuroscientist who's been in the field longer than 10 years, and they're like, wait, what? How is this going to help me understand dreams? How is this going to help me understand creativity? It's so it just keeps happening. And so you have this whole sort of pantheon of 20,000 people a year. I mean, it's a huge field starting to move towards, wait, is the physical the only thing that matters? Is this a science? Can we do this? So yeah, I felt it was important to defend that.
And I think that anything that convinces people that chopping up brains and trying to look at the cells inside of them to be able to say something is really important, because you look at the history of neuroscience research, and it is a ghastly field.
Oh my God. And it's beautiful too. I mean, you would pick up on the dark part, but if you look at some of Ramon Cajal's beautiful drawings of neurons, they're just artworks. And so it's also a beautiful field, but absolutely disgusting too, yeah.
I think that's what draws people in, right? Because you're like,
Yeah.
I'm going to understand the brain, I'm going to understand the mind, I'm going to understand humans, and then you get into the details of it. And
Yeah.
but yeah, you're right. That is the resonant focus for me.
How can we bring this back to something that makes us feel desperation for the future?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it was very good. I think it was great.
Yeah. I think your resonant focus is really important, and I think people need to look at that. And there is hope. I mean, people can't live without hope, so.
Amen to that.